This is material I'm going through it. I've dabbled in it, but I've never done what I'm doing with you. So I'm enjoying the journey. If what you're looking for from me in Genesis 1 and 2 about the creation is like a heated debate about whether the earth is 10,000 years old or 4 billion years old, or whether the word day refers to 24 hours or an age, or what happened to the dinosaurs. I mean, these are real questions. You know, you're probably going to be disappointed in the way I come at this. I would encourage you to, if you've never been to the Ark Encounter in North Indiana, I'm a fan. They're a bunch of fundamentalists who will tell you exactly where they're coming from and will make you feel like if you're not where they are, they may make you feel like you don't believe the Bible, which I really regret that they do that. But on the other hand, I've probably met as many people as many Christians who believe the Bible, who believe in creation, but who look down their nose at fundamentalists who believe in a young earth, 24-hour day. And I have as much problems with them, frankly. So I'm somewhere in the middle on most of those things, on the age of the earth at least. But I don't think that's really what Genesis 1 is about. Excuse me. Some people do. But, oh, thank you. I've still got one there, and I've got water. Thank you. I came away from St. Matthew with at least 3 different packs of lozenges. People kept giving it to me. Thank you. But I do grow weary of the two camps that sort of anathematize one another. I'm a little probably bipolar. Anyway. I want to say to people sometimes, stop arguing over the recipe and just enjoy the meal. You know, I think that's the... Okay, but let me dive in. You're welcome to ask me where I stand on some of those issues. Those are important issues. They're very important issues, and it's fine to feel passionate about them. The question is, what is Scripture actually trying to communicate? And I frankly don't believe that Moses wrote. I do think Moses wrote it, but I don't believe he wrote Genesis 1 and 2 to help us figure out how old the earth is. I don't think that was the first purpose in his mind. But, so I may offend somebody, but it won't be the first time. I told the folks I preached the truth about sexuality at Belleville. It's one of my sermons. But I said, but I am leaving town on Monday morning, so I feel good about this. Okay. There is the story of a woman. This story is actually told. I haven't read Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, but he apparently loved this story and told it. I'd like to sort of know more on why he liked this story. But the story of a woman who claimed the world was flat and was resting on the back of an elephant. Her friend said, well, what's the elephant standing on? And she paused and she said, well, on a giant turtle. And then her friend said, well, what's the turtle standing on? And the woman shot back, it's turtles all the way down. When it comes to the question of origins, how far back can we go? That's what that story is about. It's, okay, if you say it began with the Big Bang, well, who created the stuff that blew up? If you say it began with a prebiotic soup when some electrical charge got the elements at just the right point and something living crawled out, okay, well, who created the soup? You know, it's like how far back do you go? And I think what Stephen Hawking was there comes a point when you say it's turtles all the way down. And Genesis, well, here's the word. Many struggle with the problem of infinite regress. That's the technical term, infinite regress. Becky, is there anything like that in mathematics? I'm seeing infinite I put you on the spot there. Oh, yeah. But just how do you go back? Well, when Genesis 1 just majestically says, in the beginning, God. So it all begins with God. And if you ask, well, where does God come from? It just proves you don't, I think, understand God, because God is, by definition, an uncaused cause. But do you know, this is just how my mind works. God was once approached by a scientist who said, hey, we don't need you anymore. We can clone people and transplant things so we can create without your help. And God says, well, let's have some competition. Let's see who can make a human being. The scientist agrees, and God declares that they should do it like they did in the old days when he created Adam. So the scientist says, he bends over and gets a handful of dirt and begins to start, and God says, no, you got to get your own dirt. But that's really what we're dealing with. And Genesis deals with it the way Genesis deals with it. It's just so majestic. And it doesn't debate it. It doesn't argue it. It just says, in the beginning, God. When compared with other creation stories of antiquity, and there's nothing better you can read on this than John Oswalt's book. My goodness, I forgot the name. I should have put it down. The Bible Among the Gods. It's on my shelf. I had it in my hand today. But it's a John Oswalt book. And it's not out of your league. It's not, some of the stuff he writes is over most of our heads. But the Bible Among the Myths, or something like that, where he's comparing basically Genesis to the Egyptian creation stories and the Babylonian creation stories. It's very important stuff. When compared with other creation stories of antiquity, Genesis 1-2 is utterly unique. There is nothing like it. For example, let me read you from the Enuma Elish. This is my version of the story. The Enuma Elish probably is 15th century BC Akkadian, or possibly Babylonian, meaning Moses may have actually known this story. He studied in Egypt. He certainly knew the Egyptian creation stories. And when I say Moses wrote it, you know, it's hard to imagine anybody else who would have had the ability to write it. And a lot of scholars talk this way, because people used to laugh when you say Moses wrote the Pentateuch, but you suggest somebody better. But this is basically how the Akkadians told the story. Now, these are my words, and I'm trying to put the story together. In the beginning, there was water. You already hear a huge difference. In the beginning, there was something. Not someone, something. Matter is what's eternal. In the beginning, there was water, primeval waters. Fresh water was a male god named Apsu, and salt water was a female deity named Tiamat. The waters came together, and the sexual union, you've always got sexuality in the pagan stories of creation, produced many deities. So when salt water and fresh water mixed, it produced deities. And these children were noisy, and they made it impossible for Apsu and Tiamat to be at peace. So Apsu became angry at his noisy children and decided to kill them. Been there, done that. Not really. Sorry. But one of his sons, the God of wisdom, rose up and killed his father. As part of his rebellion, this god helped to create Marduk, the storm god. Tiamat was furious that her husband had been killed, so she gave birth to 11 dragons to fight Marduk. The battle was fierce, but Marduk finally won the victory, but in the process, he had to kill his mother. So he cut her body in half, and with the upper half, he made the sky, and the lower half became the earth. He also created the sun, moon, stars, and the calendar. Marduk took some of the blood of the slain commander of his mother's army, a fellow named Kingu, and mixed it with dirt, and out of this mixture of blood and dirt, he created the first man. Man's job from then on was to meet the needs of the gods and goddesses and keep them fed by providing sacrifices. I submit to you that Genesis is a whole lot better. But that's fairly typical. And I think if you did Aztec stories of creation, Native American, most of the tribes and peoples of the earth have had, Mommy, where did I come from? And there's stories to explain that. And there's parts of that that you wonder, I wonder if they had part of the source of that, 3,500 years ago was maybe true, but it got mixed with other stuff. The blood and dirt to create man, I thought is that dirt? The dirt part is how Genesis tells it. Anyway. Read John Oswalt. I find this stuff very interesting, and if you think paganism is just something that happened long ago, far away, it is with us today with a vengeance. I'm not kidding. Not by these names, but the same kind of understandings of where we came from. The contrast between the creation accounts of Genesis and those of Israel's pagan neighbors is startling. And just do this quickly. But on the non-biblical accounts on the left, things like the Enuma Elish, it's always myth. Time and space are unimportant. Like, do we know when these things happened? It's no. And when I read it, you sort of know, I don't think that's true. It's just sort of a story. Like Paul Bunyan and the Blue Ox or something. You sort of know, I don't think that's supposed to be true. Genesis comes across as true, especially when we get next week to Genesis chapter 2. There's a garden called Eden. It's got 4 rivers in it. 2 of them are called Tigris and Euphrates. And we all say, ooh, I know where those are. I think he's talking about a real place. And Adam and Eve have descendants that come all the way down to Moses, who was writing. So it's, okay. Non-biblical, always polytheistic. There's many gods. Genesis, it's so majestic. In the beginning, God. Non-biblical creation is always out of some pre-existent stuff. There's something there. Water or dirt, and it's always been there. But in Genesis, it's creation out of nothing. God just speaks, let there be. There are sexual themes, and sexuality, at least in God, is absent. Genesis. The gods shape and form matter. In Genesis, God speaks creation into existence. On the left, the gods are known through nature, which is like astrology. but nature is known through God, which produces astronomy. Anybody know the author Rodney Stark? Anybody read Rodney Stark stuff? I've got a... He writes a lot about the question, why did astronomy arise only in Western Europe? Because all these cultures, China, India, had astrology, but only in the West did they make the jump from astrology to astronomy. And he says, why? He's on to something. And he says, there's only one reason. Trinitarian monotheism. But you have to read Rodney Stark. Becky, you're looking at me with your brow furrowed. The other one he uses is, you know what alchemy is? Alchemy is when you mix things together to make potions. All cultures have done that. Pretty sophisticated. But only in Western Europe did they make the jump from alchemy to chemistry. And Rodney Stark says, why? What was it in the worldview that enabled people to make the jump from saying, I think there's something going on in the sky, astrologically, to saying that's astronomy? And it's Genesis 1 and 2.
If you go to the Creation Museum, they have astronomy.
Excellent. Did you hear this? She was saying the Creation Museum deals with these questions because they're huge. And we need to know how to, with our children and grandchildren, just raise these questions. The non-biblical accounts, it's a polyverse or a multiverse. Only the Judeo-Christians said, no, it's a universe. It obeys laws. And the same laws that work on Earth work on Mars. And so science is possible. It's a cyclical concept of existence on the left, and on the right, it's a linear. This is huge. Nearly everybody sort of had an Eastern concept of history repeats itself. And whether that's reincarnation or whether it's the 4 seasons, but isn't it true that, you know, what goes around comes around? And, well, the Bible says no, history is going somewhere. It's huge. Read John Oswald on this. This is, he's better than I am. The gods, on the left side, the gods are unethical and immoral. I said this to the folks at St. Matthew when I talked about the truth about sexuality, but I said, I think, this is pretty raw, but I think my first introduction, or my first exposure to pornography was 9th grade literature class, Edith Hamilton's book on Greek mythology. Anybody else read Edith Hamilton on Greek mythology? And I began to read about the gods are doing stuff that I didn't even know what it was. They were doing stuff with men and animals and producing hybrids, and they were immoral. They were bad people. And if you worship a God who is unholy, no one should be surprised if you are unholy. But if you worship the one who is holy, 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 this is huge. And you read, even in the short little thing that I was telling you, there's murder going on, there's rape going on, there's among the gods. The gods must submit. Yeah, remember Zeus? Zeus was always sort of controlled by fate, and he was the king of the gods in the Greeks. Well, none of that in the Bible. God is absolute and sovereign. In non-biblical accounts, it blurs the boundaries between man and animal. What's a centaur? Well, it's part man, part horse. You don't have any of that in the Bible. The boundary between man and animal is crystal clear. you do have one talking donkey. And the serpent talks. Watch out. Or the boundaries between male and female. And the only people that blurred those boundaries in the scripture basically got destroyed. Places like Sodom. The boundaries between right and wrong. Or the boundaries between God and man. You don't have people that are, okay, you get the point. Left column, the gods are part of this world system, but in Genesis, God is wholly other. In other words, if the universe disappeared tonight, what would happen to God? Nothing. He'd be fine. That's not true in Greece or Babylon or Rome. If the moon disappears, the moon god disappears too, because he's tied to the moon. God is other than. This is a little philosophical, a little theological, but it sets the stage for everything that follows. Yes, sir.
In this list of things on the left-hand side, where it talks about time and space are unimportant, and I'm not here to debate, numbers over it, but the issue of time is really, really important. I don't know if you're aware of, I'm sure, of the infinite monkey theorem, which says basically if you give a monkey a typewriter and enough paper that he can write one of Shakespeare's plays. Well, if people believe that, then God's not necessary, because with enough time, anything can happen. And that's why I think it's so important that we're a little careful about when we discuss the issue of the length of creation, because that in one way we're arguing that we're saying, well, we don't know what God did, and we don't. But at the other end, we're leaving a loophole, or giving an opening to people to say, well, given enough time, anything could happen. So I just think we need to be guarded with that in how we approach it.
I'm with you. I hear you. I don't think that's the main thrust of what Genesis is trying to communicate, but when you raise the questions, you are raising important things that need to be talked about. There are excellent books that are out there. I mean, some really good stuff to read. And that if you want some suggestions, I can give you some. But thank you, Paul. Let's keep going. C, origin determines destiny. All of this is introduction. We're about to get to chapter 1. Origin determines destiny. In other words, where I came from determines where I'm going. It matters whether you understand your origin as a random set of mutations that evolved from a primeval chemical soup, or whether you believe you were created by God. What we tell our children in school about where they came from matters. And here's just the way I do it. Daddy, and I picture myself, I can go right back in time to where these conversations with my dad. Tell me again about Great-Grandpa Chess. Wounded at Spotsylvania, he supposedly had a crease in his skull where a Yankee mini ball almost took him out, and he walked home barefoot from Virginia at the close of the war and became a Methodist lay preacher. He didn't have enough education to be a preacher, so he was an exhorter, but he started praying that God would raise up preachers from his family. But that's Grandpa Chess, and it's just, Danny knows these stories. He's heard them too. Or I would say, tell me about Granddaddy in Keys Cafe, where during the Depression he sold hamburgers for a nickel, and apparently wasn't a very good businessman, but was a godly influence in the community. Or tell me about how you met Mommy at a place in Kentucky called Asbury when you let a ground ball go between your legs and it went into the crowd and landed at the feet of Ruth Ann Shockley and you looked up into the bluest eyes you'd ever seen in your life. He would tell that story over and over when he met Miss Blue Eyes, who's my mother. Why are those stories, even as children, why do you say, tell me again, tell me again? This is what I just said. I didn't know it then, but I was trying to figure out my identity and my purpose by learning about my origins. When I heard about Grandpa Chess, when I heard about how Mom and Dad met, I was learning about who am I and what's my purpose. This is why American history is so important. Were our ancestors white, male, imperialist, greedy to take the land of others? That's the story I hear most frequently, that our ancestors came to these shores to steal the land from the Indians. We were slave-owning, white, male chauvinists, Europeans. You know, the worst thing that can happen to the earth. Or did we begin with, as Christian pilgrims, yearning to build a city on a hill? I can still remember Ronald Reagan talking about, we're a city on a hill. Ronald Reagan, we're a city on a hill. And what he was doing, he was tapping in to the creation story to make it relevant for today. Who are we? That's why Genesis is important, not for America's sake or the Key family's sake. I'm trying to illustrate it. You getting this? Okay. Those who shape our culture's creation story are the de facto priests and will determine the dominant worldview. Our future is determined by how we understand our past. And I frankly don't know if it's too late to turn the clock back on at least the American creation story, but I feel sort of passionate about what's been lost. John Lennox, it's a pretty new guy. He's got like 3 PhDs. He's very impressive, from Oxford. He's gives a helpful illustration to show the limits of science. He imagines his Aunt Matilda. I love it when very bright people tell a very humble story because there's reasons for it. Aunt Matilda baking a cake that is taken to a group of the world's top scientists for analysis. They determine the ingredients of the cake and how the ingredients relate together. And then John imagines asking them, but why was the cake made? And then he writes, the grin on Matilda's face shows that she knows the answer because she made the cake and she made it for a purpose. But all the nutrition scientists, biochemists, chemists, physicists, and mathematicians in the world will not be able to answer the question. And it's no insult to their disciplines to state their incapacity to answer it. Their disciplines, which can cope with questions about the nature and structure of the cake, that is, answering the what? How questions, cannot answer the why question. Science is not designed to answer the why question, connected with the purpose for which the cake was made. In fact, the only way we shall ever get an answer is if Aunt Matilda reveals it. To say with Bertrand Russell, who's the atheist, because science cannot tell us why Aunt Matilda made the cake, we cannot know why she made it, is patently false. All we have to do is ask her. Aunt Matilda, we know what's in your cake. We know how the ingredients work together. We've even figured out the age of your cake. We scientists are good at things like that. But we don't know why you made it. And I think she would just smile and say, I'm so glad you asked. And she's got a reason of whatever it is. That's a good illustration. To me, that's a very good illustration. If you want to know the purpose of creation, don't ask a biochemist. Ask the Creator. Those who pretend, this is a long introduction. Those who pretend there's a conflict between Genesis and science have failed to think deeply about the question. Science claims to answer the how and the when questions. Genesis claims to answer the who and the why. So what I'm basically, humbly suggesting to you is, I believe Genesis is about who did it and why, not how he did it and when. The how and when are important, and Genesis has some things to say about it, but that's not really what it's about. It's about who did it and why, who created it and why. To me, that's liberating. I don't know if it strikes you that way. But to distinguish science from the Bible does not mean we are to separate them. And this is a quote from Henri Blocher. And I'm giving you some of my favorite books in the footnotes. If you want to look them up, they'll be a lot better than I am. For example, for those people who say, well, the Bible is not a handbook on science. Okay, but that does not mean the Bible will have nothing to say which touches the realm of science. The fact that the primary purpose of Genesis is not to instruct us in geology does not exclude the possibility that it says something of relevance to the subject. And again, go visit the Creation Museum. There's a lot of very interesting stuff about Geology 101 and how the Bible has some pretty interesting things to say about that. In the last analysis, one cannot make an absolute separation between physics and metaphysics. I thought that was a great statement. And religion has to do with everything precisely because all realms are created by God and continue to depend on Him. Faith rests on facts. It's faith, but it's not faith based on nothing. It's faith based on something that enables me to take the leap of faith. How are we doing? I'm having a good time up here. It would be hard, we're almost done with my intro. It would be hard to overemphasize the fact that when it comes to dealing with the issues of origin, the real conflict is not between science and religion. This is what in the popular sphere is like, well, I can't believe Genesis because science and religion don't have anything to do with it. We need to learn to say it's not about science and religion. That's not where the conflict is. Some of the best scientists in history have been ardent lovers of Jesus and believes in the Word. I mean, that's easy to substantiate. But it's not the conflict between science and religion, but between two opposite world views, naturalism and theism. Naturalism, here's 2 bullets, claims that there's nothing but nature. It is a closed system of cause and effect. There's nothing outside. There's no transcendent reality. Carl Sagan, remember how the program Cosmos began? The cosmos is all there is, or was, or ever shall be. And I just sort of want to say, says who? And is that a scientific statement? We got some bright people here tonight. I'm looking at some PhDs in the room. Theism asserts that nature is an open system because it's been created by a supreme being. It is summarized in the opening words of Genesis, in the beginning God created it all. Now look at the note. Both Genesis and Sagan's affirmation are statements of faith. not science. The key is not, therefore, some supposed conflict between science and religion, but rather the freely made choice of which world view will inform your scientific exploration. Anyway, are we okay? Let me read Genesis 1 with you. My plan is to do Genesis 1 today, and next week to do Genesis 2. And so we're really going to leave out today the creation of man. I mean, we'll read about it, but we're going to come back next week and talk about where do we fit in the cosmos. But right now, I want to mainly talk about the big picture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Last week we talked about tohu and bohu. Formless and empty. It had no shape. So matter, he created matter that needed shaping. And then when he did shape it, it needed filling. So he gave shape, and then he filled the empty. Over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. When Jesus was baptized, and the dove, it doesn't say hovered, but I think it's a picture of old creation, new creation. And God said, so he breaks the silence. I don't know when the music of the spheres started, but it hasn't started yet. But the first sound, let there be light. I cannot imagine anything more majestic. He doesn't take any stuff and shape something. He doesn't break a sweat. He speaks it. It's called creation by fiat, if you want to know the Latin word, but God speaks it. By the word of God were the heavens made. He spoke, and it came to be. And God saw that the light was good. And you get the impression that God he's enjoying this. And God separated the light from darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. So look at what's going on. God speaks, God sees, God separates, God names. Welcome to human history. That's basically what God's going to be doing until Christ comes back. And there was evening and morning. In Jewish thought, the day begins at sundown. Sabbath begins when? Friday night. Basically, the day begins and you go to bed. I'm absolutely intrigued by that. And I think it's basically a way of saying, God, you're not sleeping, but I am. You can hold the world together, and I'll see you in a few hours when I get up. Midday. Verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate waters from waters. And God made the expanse and separated waters that were under the expanse from above the expanse. Again, the Creation Museum talks a lot about this is not the oceans, this is waters above and waters below. I don't fully understand all that, but that's day 2. Verse 9, God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear. You see, he's forming, he's shaping. What was formless, he's forming, and now after he's formed it, he's going to fill it. Formless and void, shaping and filling. Look at verse 11. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation. And he saw that it was good. Day 3, verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. Let them be lights in the expanse. God made the 2 great lights, and a lot of commentaries notice the fact that he doesn't even call them the sun or the moon or the stars. And the reason may have been because so many people thought those were deities. He just said there was a big light and there was a little light. I'm not even going to honor it with a name except to say it's a big light and a little light, and you all know what I'm talking about. It's very interesting. And this is the work of a master artist, inspired text. Look at verse 20. That was day 4. And God said, let the waters, so the sea now, he's formed the sea, but the sea is empty. So he's going to fill what he formed. Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves. And God saw it was good. That was day 5. Verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures. So now the earth was formed, but it was empty. So let's fill the earth. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds. God saw that it was good. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image. The Hebrew word for man, Adam, is the generic term for mankind. Some of you have footnotes on that. But note the plural pronoun. God did not say, we've been insisting on the fact that there's only one God. But God didn't say, let me make man in my image. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and the livestock and over the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And said, first commandment, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion. Pretty important action verbs there. That was the 6th, and verse 31, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, day 6. Keep going. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, all the host of them, and on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. He made it holy. This day is different than the other 6. Because on it God rested from all the work that he had done. Does it say, and there was evening and morning a 7th day? No, it doesn't. You can say, yeah, you're all afraid to answer my question. I don't blame you. A lot of questions about why doesn't it say there was evening and morning a 7th day? And the answer that I like the best is because I don't think that day's over yet. I think we're still living in the Sabbath day of God. But there's debate on why he didn't say it that way. You don't like that answer, Paulette? That's okay.
It's just redundant,
It's redundant.
obviously.
Okay.
Why would he say it again and again and again?
skip down to Roman numeral 3. I've given you some notes there. Look at the paragraph on letter A on Roman numeral 2. The author seems to be motivated to some degree by literary style as much as by chronological order. As I read it, it's not a poem, it's not a hymn, but it's, well, I just said it's almost poetic. The way he repeats things, and God said, and God said, and God called. It was good, it was good. There was evening, there was morning. God separated, God separated. You hear these refrains. And the interesting way he shapes it and then fills it. He shapes it and fills it. This doesn't mean the passage is non-historical, but it does mean that we should not press the text too hard for scientific details. I'd love to talk with you more about that, but what is Moses doing? Is his intent, to give a scientific chronology, or is his intent to give sort of a logical categorization sequenced through days of how it all came together? There's a lot of interesting work on this, and people very conservative trying to wrestle with what is the text actually trying to say. And a lot of emotion, a lot of passion. I'm a little conflicted. I'm not quite sure where I stand on some of that personally, and it can get a little complicated as well. Anyway, can we close with some points? Roman numeral 3 is, if you've hung out with me, you know this is where usually the exhortations come. Let me just try to answer two questions and then close. What does Genesis 1 teach us about God? And Roman numeral 4, what does Genesis 1 teach us about the universe? And next week, we're going to say, what does Genesis 1 and 2 teach us about us? About Adam and Eve, the image of God, the dirt plus spirit part, the male and female part, the don't eat the tree part, the marriage part, the rib of Adam part. That's pretty good stuff. That's next week. So we're going to put it together. But first of all, I think the big statement in Genesis 1 is who is doing this, because this is our introduction to the God of the Bible, the God who's going to call Abraham, the God who's going to send his son to die on a cross. Who is he? I want to just, let me say it this way. A, God is. Pretty simple statement. The Bible does not try to prove God because it assumes his presence is self-evident. Remember, we hold these truths, the Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Such a great word, self-evident. It's hard to improve. Many of you will be familiar with this. I can't do better. It's 300 years old, or 200. It's hard to improve on the argument proposed by William Paley. And it goes like this. On walking through a field, he first says, I stubbed my toe on a rock. And he says, I actually don't think much about it. But a rock, I don't. But then he says, then I stumble upon a watch lying on the ground. Suppose I find a watch lying on the ground. Could this be there by chance? Could it have created itself? Or could enough millennia have gone by for Paul Hammond's statement for the metal to get in the right shapes and to come together with the tension and the springs in just the right way so that there's a clock ticking there on the ground. And his conclusion is, if there is a watch, there must be a watchmaker. I look, whether you're looking through a telescope at the Milky Way or whether you're looking through a microscope at the double helix DNA chromosome, either direction, the complexity makes a watch look like child's play. Child's play. But so, Genesis, what does Genesis teach us about God? It says He is. Number 2, it says God is eternal. It's not turtles all the way down, but it is God all the way down. There's nothing behind, beyond, or under God. He is the absolute absolute. I traveled some with Dr. Sam Kamalason, and in India, when he would preach about the absolute absolute to Indians. I mean, who this was sort of their language. But he said, I'm not talking about the absolute. I'm talking about the absolute absolute. That's who Jesus is. It's just, okay. He's eternal. He's omnipotent. He's an artist of infinite skill who can create anything he desires. He loves beauty. A few years ago, I was out when Jaden, our grandson, was probably 2, and we were wrestling in the grass or something. But I was teaching him about dandelions and blowing dandelions, and then I looked at one. Have you looked at a spherical dandelion and the geometrical? I don't even have the word. I just said, Jaden, look at this, and he just blew it. But it's like this is and there's millions of them. So whether you use a telescope or a microscope, we see His amazing design. When I went in to get my hearing aids a few years ago, I just remember telling the ladies, I said, these ears are amazing pieces of equipment, and God gave us 2 of them. Mine's not working very well. Anyway. But I think for William Paley, it was the eye. He kept saying it's the eye. But there's thousands of watches lying around. It's not just one watch. How do you explain the eye? How do you explain DNA? How do you explain the Milky Way? How do you explain the tilt of the axis is just the right angle so that we don't fry? How do you explain that our planet is placed in the Milky Way so that we can actually see the Milky Way? We're not just looking out into nothing. I mean, the list is D. God is transcendent. He's distinct from His creation. He's not part of nature. If the universe suddenly disappeared, God would remain unchanged. E. This text tells us that God is one. Unique among all the creation stories of the ancient world, there's only one God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And yet, F, God is multiple. And look, there's 3 bullets there, at least 3 hints of the Trinity. The first bullet is God's Word. And God said. And when John wrote his gospel and said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word what? Was with God. So the Word is not the same as God, but yet the Word is God, but the Word is God. It is, but it's distinct. Welcome to the Trinity. 3 yet one. 3 yet one. The Word. Jesus is the self-expression of God. He breaks the silence. And it takes breath, takes spirit to form a word, which is the second bullet. The Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Who's the Spirit? Well, He is God, but not quite God. The words aren't right. And then the plural pronouns. Let us make man in our image. So, according to my reading this week, but even people like Karl Barth, this is a pretty sort of radical statement in academia to say that the Trinity is found in Genesis chapter 1. That's pretty radical. But even Karl Barth recognized there's at least an echo of the Trinity here. It's like, that works. That works.
There's another place, a little more subtle. You have to know Hebrew. The word for God is Elohim.
Keep going.
Used as a singular subject.
Yes. The word used for God is Elohim, which is plural. So it can be translated God with an S on it, but in Scripture it's typically not. But the verb form used with the plural noun is the singular verb.
One of my favorites is in Isaiah 54 where he says the Creator is your husband, where he's talking to the widows. Well, if you look at it closely in Hebrew, they're both plural. The creators are your husbands.
Okay, good. G, oh man, we got to finish here. God is personal. The God of Genesis 1 is no impersonal force or cosmic energies. You remember Star Wars, may the force be with you. That's impersonal. Letter 4, what Genesis teaches us about the universe. Let me just give you the bullets. That nature is real. One of the basic tenets of, if I understand it, of Hinduism is nature is Maya, which means an illusion. And what is it? The story, the guru or something who one night dreamed he was a butterfly, but then the next day he said, but what if I'm a butterfly who right now is dreaming that I'm a human? I mean, this is where you go in Eastern thought. Well, Genesis, it just doesn't deal with that kind of, I don't even know the word for it, meditative gobbledygook, and that's disrespectful. But this is not a dream. But like Aunt Matilda's cake, nature is not self-explanatory. You can look at nature a long time and not figure out why we're here. You got to ask Aunt Matilda. What's the point here? Okay. B, nature is comprehensible. And this is when, if you read Rodney Stark, he says this is why only the Judeo-Christian worldview has produced science. Only the Judeo-Christian view has produced science, because Christians look at the universe and say, I think we can understand it. Are we rotating around the sun, or is the sun rotating around us? We're going to figure that out, because the laws are going to be God's laws, and it's going to be good. It is governed by laws. Therefore, nature invites us to study it. This accounts for the rise of science. Oh, look at this. Yeah, this is a great quote by Albert Einstein. Listen to this one. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. That's a good quote. Because if it is just chance plus time, it shouldn't make sense. And it would be an exercise in futility to try to understand it. C, nature is good. D, nature reflects the glory of God. And E, and we're going to come back to this next week, the earth was specifically designed as a home for humans. It's not egotistical, if I understand the Bible, for us to say the universe was created for us. It's like we're the pinnacle of creation. Now, if you want to talk about the real pinnacle, Eve is the real pinnacle. Adam's got to take a nap to get to the cherry on the top. But God created the universe as a home for Adam and Eve. And we're going to see it in the Garden of Eden next week. So 3 words in closing. A, God speaks through nature if we take off our shoes and listen. And I just had this come to mind. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, earth crammed with heaven, and every bush aflame with God, but he who sees takes off his shoes, the rest sit around and pluck blackberries. And that's what I felt like when I looked at that dandelion. You know, it was like, Lord, I probably ought to be worshiping right now on my face. How did you do that? But I just spend my day picking blackberries, you know. I miss how he speaks to us. B, but we need more than the message of nature. The heavens declare the glory of God, but they do not tell us how we can be saved. We need something more. And then C, we will never find our identity and our mission in life until we discover our origin. I love this verse when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, laid aside his garments and took a towel. In other words, the reason he was able to serve and to give his life a ransom was because he knew his origin and he knew his destiny. And none of us can serve if we're not sure about where we came from and where we're going. That's really good. Send me an email if there's something I didn't say right, or if you want to share some thoughts. I'm sorry I do all the talking. I'm sort of sorry I do all the talking. Let me pray. Father, thank you for Genesis 1, and thank you for dandelions. Thank you for the DNA double helix. Thank you for the beauty of the earth and the glory of the skies. Thank you for men and women made in your image. And give us the ability, even as we begin a new day by going to bed tonight, to just rest content in the reality that you are creator and sustainer of it all. And it's good. It's good. It's good. Give us hearts to praise you, voices to sing your praise. Dismiss us with your blessing and keep us in your care. In Jesus' name, amen.